The undertone that I hear in that Satram, which is really delightful, is moving the responsibility for addiction away from someone who is addicted.
It is. The responsibility is the community.
Yeah.
Let me understand you from a place of compassion and care, the compassion of understanding. Let me understand your trauma, what happened to you. That's why you're in this predicament right now. So there's no blame, no shame. It's just what happened to you. And then the next one is what happened to your ancestors. Because the tendency to addiction, it could be from our childhood experience, but our childhood experiences, the trauma also can be passed down through several generations. So we may be reflecting, if we have an addiction, more also from our ancestors, what they went through. So it's what happened to your ancestors. And then finally, the healing eventually is you're not what happened to you. Once we heal and process all of that, metabolize all of that, go through all that pain, release all that pain, get to the other side, and then we recognize, oh, here's back to my true identity. My true identity is not what happened to me. My true identity is this ever-present essence in me that can never be damaged. That's where we want to take people. But that's a process. It's a long process of healing that can be done only through relationship, I believe.
This is the Gifts of Trauma podcast. Stories of transformation and healing through compassionate inquiry.
We're back again for another episode of the Gifts of Trauma podcast from Compassionate Inquiry. So my name is Kevin Young, and I am here with Dharam Kaur, who is CEO. Would that be fair enough? CEO of Compassionate Inquiry, Dharam? Co-director, along with Dr. Gabor Mate, of course, as your other co-director.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to have you here, Dharam, and our topic today loosely based around the relationship of compassionate inquiry and addiction. And I wonder, would you, rather than me introduce you, would you like to take a few moments and introduce yourself? And I would be keen if you would do that with a finger on the idea of addiction. How come Dharam Kaur is working in this field, designing these programs around addiction?
Thanks, Kevin. So I had a personal experience with addiction when, as a child, with my mother, who was addicted to alcohol. In the first 4 years of my life, she wasn't. And my assumption is I had a fairly, no, I won't say it. I was going to say fairly happy childhood, but I won't say that. But I got some good attention from her, let's put it that way, in the first 4 years of my life. And then we had a terrible car accident, and she was driving, and my father was beside her in the front seat, and myself and my 2 sisters were in the back seat. And there was a flat tire, and the car flew in the air, something like 200 feet, got smushed up like an accordion. And at that time, nobody wore seatbelts. So the doors flung open and we all flew out the doors into a nearby field. But my mother went through the windshield. And so she suffered a terrible blow to her prefrontal cortex in her head. And so that trauma for her was irreparable. And it was after that she started to drink alcohol. And soon after that, her sister was in a car accident, and 2 of her children were killed, like within a year. And then my mother just spun down further after that. And so alcohol became her relief, or numbed her pain or something. There was she didn't find the services or the healing she required at that time, or it wasn't available to her, even though she was a nurse. And so she leaned on the alcohol, and I would say she leaned on me. I was the youngest of three. And so I became her, I would say, an emotional soother in some way. And so I picked up her pain. I was aware of her emotional pain. And for much of my childhood, I wanted to save her. I couldn't. So that helplessness, really, that sense of helplessness and the deep grief of a child and not being able to save their mother, that was alive in me. And so when I had the opportunity to create a yoga-based addiction program, that's what motivated me to embark on that. Is, okay, I couldn't heal my mother. She died of alcoholism in her early 60s. But I can support other people. So that's how I would say, the pieces that were in place to make this something that was important for me to do. That's what it was, is to heal the pain of my mother. And even though I couldn't do that, I could heal the pain of others, perhaps. It was necessary for me too, because underneath that was my own helplessness. How do I live with that helplessness and that despair unless I'm helping others? So if I'm not helping others in some way, what I'm left with is despair and helplessness, and that's not what I want to live with. So that's where this whole thrust comes from, is the antidote to the despair and the helplessness that's buried in me from early childhood.
Thank you for sharing that, Dharam. And I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so sorry to hear that happened and that was your experience. It's a heartbreaking story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Miraculous story too, that we all survived.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I just wonder, and I hope this isn't too personal to ask, how is that child right now who was trying to save her mother and was leaned on so heavily by her mother? How's she doing?
She's a lot better now. That it's been so rewarding, a lot of the work I've done with addiction, and I still do with addiction, and with compassion inquiry, and as a healer with naturopathic medicine. I've spent decades helping people, and so that need has been realized to be of service. The despair is more difficult because there's a lot of despair in the world. And it's easy for me to feel that. I can feel it. That's where my yoga practice comes in handy, to move me out of that possible state of despair through practices that take me away from that. I'm basically a positive person. Like, I'm very optimistic by nature, and I was optimistic as a child, but I think everybody's affected by the despair in the world right now. So I'm not immune to that. So that child in me feels that too, feels that pain. Absolutely.
Thank you. I think even that I can feel myself learning about myself. And we've only just started having this conversation for 5 or 10 minutes right now. And you said something just now. Actually, you didn't say it. You made a point of not saying it. You were about to say, I had a happy childhood. And of course, anyone within the compassionate inquiry community and who are familiar with the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, will know that is his in with people when they say, I had a reasonably happy childhood. And he'll say, okay, let's just talk about that. And you didn't go there. I wonder if you would take a few moments and talk to us then. What is the relationship between, not having a happy childhood or believing that you had a happy childhood, not being able to recognize that your childhood wasn't happy, and addiction?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So first of all, we have to start with the word attachment, don't we? So our initial need as a mammal is to be with a parent, ideally a mother and a father, but at least one, and ideally the mother in the first few months of our lives, who can be loving, be attuned, be present, be caring, be nurturing, attend to our needs as we need them. And so that we feel held, secure, comforted, soothed as we need it. So in a sense that, and now we know from polyvagal theory that adult figure then calms our nervous system, and our nervous system can develop in the way it's supposed to when we have that kind of a regulating presence for the first few years of our lives. So that builds then what is called healthy attachment, secure attachment within the child, of knowing that they're going to be okay no matter what. They're safe no matter what. Their needs are met no matter what. And in theory, that child would be much less likely to have an addiction later on, because inside of them is this kind of like wholeness, and I'm okay because the world is treating me like I'm okay. So that sense of self as being okay arises in utero, particularly the last 3 months of pregnancy and the first 3 years of our lives. And then we have this connection to ourselves, connection to our body, connection to our emotions. Our identity is mirrored. We get the idea that we're important, we matter, we're loved, if all that is present. If that's missing because one of the parents is overly stressed or working outside of the home a lot of the time, or distracted, or working on their own issues, or there's conflict between the parents and they're always fighting, then the child's needs are not met, and that secure attachment won't have developed. So then that child is looking for something to complete itself, and that something is missing. And then the whole brain and the neurological circuits relating to pleasure and reward and calming and motivation may not develop fully for that child, because we need the parent and that care for those circuits to develop. So then there's something missing, and that there's a disconnection from the self, from the body, from the emotions. So when there's something missing, if the child's needs aren't met, then they have to do something. They have to establish some sort of coping strategy to get their needs met. And they, in developing that coping strategy, often they disconnect from their emotions, from their needs, from their authentic voice. So in terms of myself, one of my coping strategies was to meet my own needs, to not believe that somebody could do it for me. So to not ask for help, to be the strong one to do it. So that was a coping strategy that I had to develop, because there must have been too many times that I was asking for help and I didn't get it. So rather than ask for help and be disappointed and hurt and in pain, I said, forget that. I don't want that hurt anymore. I'm just going to do it myself. So that's been one of my lifelong coping strategies, because of whatever was missing for me in terms of attachment as a young child. Now, underneath that, what's underneath that coping strategy? There'd be hurt, there'd be sadness, there'd be some shame, there's some pain. So what am I going to do with that? So that need, when IFS, that would be the exiled part. That little child in me still has those needs. The hurt is still there. So then what am I going to do to soothe that? Right? The pain is there. I'm going to have something to soothe it. So that's where an addiction could develop, possibly. And whatever the substance or behavior is that soothes the addiction is directly related to the need that wasn't met. So if it was a need to be calmed by a parent, maybe the addiction is marijuana. If it was a need for sweetness and comfort, maybe it's sugar or an opiate. If it was a need for encouragement, then it'll be some sort of stimulus. So we want to look at our addictive patterns, and from that we can gather maybe what was missing for the even individual when they were a child. So that's how the addictions develop. It starts with some break in the attachment to the parents, and the child not being attuned to, the child not being allowed to be themselves, the child's needs not being met, and either they have to meet those needs themselves, or they have to become who the parent expects them to be, or they have to become who the parent needs them to be. I had to become who my mother needed me to be, because her needs, her emotional needs were bigger than mine. And so then what happens to me, right? What happens to my emotional needs? So then that's what is the emptiness, these emotional needs that aren't met, that then the addiction fills that hole with.
It's interesting, Sat, that I'm listening to you, and I know through our community and Gabor's teachings, Gabor quotes Almus a lot, and Almus talks about that we don't often notice the deficiency. We don't often see, Almus calls it the hole. We don't see the hole. We see the behavior that is trying to fill the hole. And I think for people listening to us and you having this conversation, when we can look and see what is it that I'm addicted to, just as you've described, and then work back to notice what might be the deficiency. And might it be useful here? You mentioned it very briefly, Satram, and I think it's really important. You mentioned Gabor's definition of addiction is any substance or behavior. So from heroin to mobile phone, from sugar to gambling, from pornography to eating. So this isn't these very stereotypical ideas of heroin use or alcoholism. And I think it's really helpful for our listeners to be able to look at those and recognize those as addictions.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go through that definition of addiction. So it's any behavior, whether it's related to substance or not, where we have craving. So there's the neurotransmitter dopamine is related to that. You want it, and you want it badly. And you can't stop that craving. So there's the inability to say no to it. It becomes an automatic circuit. And that's called some people call it the motivational brain circuit. It's related to pleasure and reward, or the addiction reward pathway, the brain reward pathway. And it has unhealthy consequences. So it's harmful to you and usually to the people around you. And you can't stop. So that's the definition, Gabor's definition of addiction.
Yeah, and that's a really important definition. So it's not just substance use.
And there's one more piece, is that the behavior of the substance gives you relief. So it's a fix for the neurological circuit that's not working. It really is a fix. If I'm not able to, if I didn't receive the love that I needed the way I needed it at different times in my development from my mother, there's still this need to receive love. So let me tell you a funny story. So one of my cravings at different times can be sweet. I'm not addicted to it in right now, but it can be when I'm stressed. That's what I'll go for. And one of the ways I like that is matcha green tea latte, and often from Starbucks. So it's a beautiful thing when I travel the world and I go to the airports, I go to Starbucks and I get my matcha green tea latte with soy milk. And it's sweet. And I also make these at home for myself in the morning. But I was driving in my town a few years ago, they opened a Starbucks. And I drive in to the drive-in window of Starbucks, and ask for my matcha green tea latte. And the woman hands it to me. And suddenly I was aware, oh my God, this is like breast milk on demand. Go to the window, it's there. It's available. I wasn't breastfed. So here's this very young part of me just wanting a sweet, warm drink, creamy, warm drink, whenever I ask for it. And so I'm so grateful to Starbucks and those people at the counter for giving me what I need when I need it.
Hmm.
And that's a substitute for the breast milk I didn't.
In relation to the severity of addiction, Satara, the questions that are rising in me is, why would you deny yourself that? Why would you deny that little girl that substitute breast milk in the form of matcha green tea latte?
I don't, only that it's got sugar in it. And unless it's really good matcha, the really good matcha, I don't mind if it's not sweetened. But the bad matcha the poor quality matcha is bitter.
So you're a purveyor of fine green tea matcha lattes. Yeah.
I am. I can tell you all the best brands.
I'm going to invite you to share some more stories about yourself, Sataram, in just a while. But again, for our listeners, I know we don't want to drop into too much teaching as we're chatting, but there's something that maybe I'd like you to explain. This idea of a happy childhood, and I did have a happy childhood or I didn't. Why might people not be able to recognize that they didn't have a happy childhood?
Because it's difficult for the child, on the one hand, to love their parents and to trust that their parents are going to take care of them, while simultaneously judging their parents or thinking that their parents are harming them in some way. So as a child, we can't hold both of those thoughts at the same time, because our survival depends on trusting our parents that they're going to take care of us and loving our parents. That's our survival depends on that. So we can't have that as a child, can't have that opposite thought that my parents are harming me, because then we couldn't survive. It's too much. So we disassociate from that, or we forget it, or we numb it, or we don't believe it, or we cover it up, or we pretend it's not happening. So it was only when I was in my, 30s perhaps, where I recognized, you know what? I didn't get the love that I needed from my mother. It took me a long time to actually honestly recognize that. Yeah. Because we want to believe the best of our parents. We love them. We trust them. They're everything to us. So how can you hold one?
Sorry for interrupting, Satara. How was that process for you to learn that in your 30s, that I didn't get the love that I should have or that I needed? Or how was that?
It was enlightening. There was grief, but it was also enlightening. And then I came to accept it. And it was through doing that I really, of course, I love my mother, and I expect that she loved me, but I have lots of ways that I could prove that she didn't. But I expect that she was doing the best she could, as our parents do. I think I was very angry at her as a teenager.
Yeah.
And I think then in my 30s, when I came to realize this, something shifted in that I became accepting, oh, that's just what happened. And I could also look at it from a place of not just forgiveness, but also appreciation, because it was a big one when I realized, you know what, if your mother hadn't been an alcoholic and you hadn't experienced what you experienced, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now. I wouldn't have such a strong need to help people. I wouldn't be interested in addiction. So that whole drama unfolding was necessary, unfortunately or fortunately, to be the groundwork from which I responded and am doing the work I'm doing now. So that's the beautiful part of it.
It is.
No matter what's happened to us, it can be compost for a gorgeous life later on, and we can make meaning of it. And it can be part of our unfolding potential when we make meaning of what happened to us, use the resources we gained, and then use that in a way that's fulfilling for ourselves. However, it's important that we use it without it being the driver. So here's the thing. If the driver in me, and it is sometimes, but if it was only to help others at the expense of myself, that would be burnout. That would be workaholism. Not okay. So what's important with this whole scenario is to become conscious of your internal drivers. Conscious of, why do I push myself? What is this pusher in me needing? It needs to be validated. Who do I think I am if I need to be validated? I have no value. So I have to be aware of my core beliefs And the drivers of my personality that are filling up those holes, as Alma said, trying to fill those holes. So really, that a core belief of I have no value is, and I would say I don't believe that now, but it was one of my core beliefs, deep unconscious belief. I have no value unless I justify my existence. That used to be one of my core beliefs. I have no value unless I justify my existence. But that's a driver. So that's the more then I work, the more the pain's going to be, because I haven't changed the core belief. It's still, I have to keep justifying my existence by doing more. So that's what has to shift in this journey of overcoming addiction, is look at the underlying core beliefs that are driving the behaviors and come to a place of unconditional self-acceptance, self-love, self-forgiveness, so that we heal those early wounds of our childhood and recognize the difference between the true self and one of these drivers of the personality that started off as a little coping mechanism and became bigger and bigger over time.
Thank you, Satra. And you've mentioned something really important as well. I think in the world that we live in, the world that a lot of us live in, you talked about feeding this core belief of I have to prove my value by being useful, and going back to that definition of addiction from Gabor, any substance or behavior. Work is one that we don't often, not only do we not recognize it, quite often it is celebrated.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic man. She's a wonderful woman. She works 16 hours a day, etc. So recognizing work as a means of soothing an emptiness that's inside us is really important for us and for our listeners.
Absolutely. And all cultures have that addiction. So the value is the work, the amount of money you make, the possessions you have. But in a sense, the Western world is addicted to consumerism. Why? Because it means I have value if I have this item, right? So that's getting us into big trouble. And that's what we want to shed some light on, is who are you really? And that's where, to heal addiction, we have to know ourselves. We have to connect to the being in us that is beyond the personality, beyond the mind, beyond the entrapment, beyond the job, beyond the material possessions that we have. Is we have to be okay with the being in us.
Beautiful, thank you. I'm very conscious that from a personal level, I would like to have very deep spiritual conversations with you. I'm not sure that this is the time or the place. Please say no if you don't want to answer this question. So who is that? What is that true self that's in us? What are we trying to return from or to?
There's a being in every aspect of creation, whether it's you or me or a bear or a coyote or a mountain or a lake, that is an expression of universal consciousness, what you would say, pure consciousness. And that being is perfect as it is. It's beyond time and space. It's beyond duality. It's pure presence. And it's pure awareness. That's what I would say. And it's pure unconditional love.
Thank you. Thank you, Sataram. Sataram, I would love to move our conversation. I want to have some time with you to talk about the development of compassionate inquiry and through addiction healing practices, etc. But there's one little piece that I'm really keen for people to hear. Maybe I'm keen to hear for it myself. I had a sister who died through drug and trauma issues. And I can recognize in this moment, as I look back on her life, there was a fear in me of moving towards helping her. Her life was chaotic. It was crazy. There was a lot of drama. And when I moved towards my sister, I would often get caught up in that drama. So that's something that kept me away from my sister, which I deeply regret right now, but I also am aware that I didn't know any better. When healing addiction, there's the person who's addicted, the person who is using, and there's often a family or a community around these people who are suffering too. how can we help them? What do those people need to know? Say it was me and there was a fear of moving towards my sister. What do I need to know? What would have helped me in that situation?
Possibly to, first of all, acceptance is the first word that comes. I believed I had to fix my mother. It was hard for me to accept my mother. As a child, how do you accept a mother who's not taking care of you? So it was hard for me as a child to accept that she had this addiction. I didn't want her to have this addiction. It was hurting her. It was hurting me. It was hurting the family. So acceptance was not a possibility for me as a child, and it's probably not a possibility for you with your sister. But that would be the first thing, is to accept the person where they're at. And that even though addiction isn't a choice, we can't tell them not to do it. That doesn't work. We also want to give them choice, stability, empowerment, and safety. So how do you give somebody who's addicted those things in whatever environment they're in? Maybe you provide a safe place for them one night a month or one day a week, invite them over to dinner. We also know the power of co-regulation and the capacity of one person to bring somebody else through their presence and their kindness and their care and their openness into an internal feeling of safety. Is how can you be with a person like that without trying to change them, but creating a safe, inviting, welcoming place for them where they can exist as they are without blame and without shame. So I think that would be the first thing, is to create safe places where there's no blame, no shame, that they can be who they are. We're going to accept them in just the way they are. And then from that place, whether that's bringing people out of homelessness into their own apartments, or whether that's having them come and have meals with you or with a group every day, that they can come, a safe place, have a meal, no one's going to judge them. But when there's that little bit of stability there with something like that, then you can move to the next level. Okay, now let's engage in some play. You want to play Frisbee, you want to go to a concert together, it's connection. It's really building connection. And then ongoing connection. And then the next piece would be opportunities for healing that they are invited to whenever they're ready, so that they make that choice whenever they're ready. And then we've got to be there when they're ready to get them into a recovery program or whatever it is that's going to work for them on their terms. I would say that's kind of it. And surround them with good people. I won't use the word good people, but surround them with people who have healthy habits, so that they're in a new environment with caring people who are modeling healthy habits rather than going back to people they were with before who are still addicted. So we've got to shift people when they're willing and interested in shifting, and then keep them in environments that are life-enhancing and supportive. And then look at what are the gifts in this individual, see them for their possibility, and help them manifest those gifts, whatever they are.
Yeah, thank you.
One more thing, word I like to use for addiction, but dopamine is a neurotransmitter related to pleasure and reward. Someone who is addicted is always looking for their substance or the behavior, right? It's just seeking, isn't it? Constant seeking. When am I going to have the next this or the next that? It's a constant seeking. The other thing that's important is that seeking has to be directed to something meaningful for the person. You can't just take away the addiction. Where's that seeking going to go?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to cultivate within the individual what gives you a sense of meaning, fulfillment, sense of purpose. What are you good at? What's your capacity? And then help them find an avenue to develop that channel. So you move the channel from the addictive substance to something bigger, that you can take that same dopamine circuit and direct it there over time. So we need that too. Either way, where is it going to go? There has to be another option to direct that seeking towards rather than the addictive substance.
Yeah, thank you, Sataram. That was very in-depth. I wonder, would you add a piece before we talk about the creation of compassionate inquiry and your role in that, and why addiction is such a big thing in that. Would you add a piece to that last question around the people who are caring for people with addiction, caring for themselves? How is that important in that role?
It's very important because otherwise we have codependency. And then somebody, like I would say I was codependent with my mother and probably a few other people in my life, of believing that my own being depended on me fixing or helping that person, right? I would have no value unless I could fix or help that person. So that's codependency. So am I doing it for them or am I doing it for me? I'm doing it for me. If I feel like I have to fix somebody, that's for me to prove my own value. So we have to be careful of that when there's people that you love or that you're caring for who have addictions, that you don't get pulled in to deal with your own pain by helping the other. So we have to be really aware of that process. And if you are living with or supporting people with addictions and it's not a codependent relationship, but you're providing these safe places or providing food or being with this person in social encounters, then it's very important that you also are taking care of yourself and recognizing your own needs and how to meet your own needs yourself or with support of others so that we can sustain the support of others. Basically, same in compassion inquiry, every level in compassion inquiry, every needs support. So whether you're a CI practitioner, who's supporting you? On our admin team, they need support. Our facilitators need support. Our mentors need support. So we all need someone to talk to, whatever level we're at, whether we're the person who's addicted or the person helping the person who's addicted. Every layer of that healing spectrum needs somebody to support them. It could be peer support. It could be the person up above managing it all. But everybody needs support because otherwise we take it on, internalize it. So that's what's really important, is to reach out for support and take care of your own nervous system, your own self-care. So that's really well in place so that you're not going to be depleted and frustrated by supporting somebody else. I hope I answered that.
You did, and if I might paraphrase just very briefly, what I hear you say, I believe, is that healing is a communal thing.
Yeah, it's a communal thing and connection on every level and everybody being able to ask for help and receive it in the way that they need it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So then maybe we could switch, set that I'm talking to you for the last 30 minutes or so, or how long we've been here. It's very clear you have a deep understanding of addiction through your own story, your own childhood and your mother and what happened there, your own healing. I'd love to hear a little bit more then about how this manifested or grew into the work that you do. Can you talk to us a little bit about the inception or the creation of compassionate inquiry and joining forces with Dr. Gabor Mate?
Yeah, probably between 2005 and 2008, I created a program for addiction recovery using yoga, meditation, breathing exercises, as well as naturopathic principles. And then I started teaching that in 2008 to groups. It was a 16-week program, 16 modules. And then in 2009, I was teaching it in Toronto, and at the same time, I was reading Dr. Gabor Mate's book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, on addiction. And it seemed like a perfect fit to the work that I was doing. And Gabor had so much more experience in working with people in the downtown East Side. And I didn't have that level of experience working with people for addiction. So I thought to reach out to him to see if he would co-teach with me so that I could incorporate his years of experience and wisdom in the program. It was a piece that I was missing, and his understanding of psychology and neurology, all that, neuroscience. And he said yes to that. And we then met in probably 2010 in person, and then decided to worked together, and he co-taught with me in 2012, 2015, 2016 in Vancouver, the Beyond Addiction program. And I had by that time trained other people in Beyond Addiction, probably had 10 trainers worldwide by then. And so he would come to the Saturday mornings. We did one weekend a month for 4 months. Gabor would come to every Saturday morning, and he would talk about addiction and the principles, and he would also work with some people one-on-one. So I could see what he was doing with people one-on-one, which was what became Compassion Inquiry. And I thought, wow, I want to be able to do that. And I want my trainers to be able to do that. Because we were realizing that there needed to be a modality of how do you work with people one-on-one. We had this great group thing going on, but then how do you work with the trauma that's behind the addiction? And so it was so strong in me. I want to learn that, and I want other people to learn it. And I was also aware at that time that Gabor was working in integration sessions with ayahuasca using Compassion Inquiry, or what was called then Gabor's method, and that he had people around him in the ayahuasca field that he was training, and that they also needed to learn it. So this is what I was aware of. I want my people to learn it. I want his people to learn it. This would be a great service to everybody so that we could collectively utilize his approach. So then I videotaped most of all of the times that he was teaching the Beyond Addiction training, plus many more workshops that I either organized or helped organize for him. And through watching those videotapes, I was able to, and transcribing them, there were, along with a few other people, we transcribed them all. And it was through constantly watching that I could pick out the details of what he was doing. And after having observed this from 2012 then to probably 2017 or so, those 5 years, is when I really developed the framework for, okay, we're gonna break this down into quality, skills, and stepping stones. Because I knew it had to be simple. How can you do this simply to teach it? Okay, this seemed like the clearest way to do it, quality, skills, and stepping stones. And I literally picked apart everything he was doing from the transcriptions, and I would categorize things. Okay, he's doing this here. There's a skill, there's a stepping stone. He didn't know what he was doing in terms of what's a skill and what's a stepping stone. In fact, he mixed them up all the time. He would say, here's a stepping stone. It wasn't a stepping stone, it was a skill. And so I was able to create a structure, really, that held it all. And every time I found something new that he did, I would find a place for it within that structure until we had the Compassion Inquiry map. And then from there, built the modules. So that's how it all evolved. And it was over from 2012 to 2017, 2018 even, because in 2018 in January, he did the Compassion Inquiry 2-day workshop in Vancouver. So it was after that one. So I had one from Toronto before then. And I think then the Edmonton one was after that. But it was after the one in Vancouver that I thought, okay, now we have enough. I have enough material now that I can put something together. We have enough videos, we have enough. And of course we didn't have enough, but it was enough to put things together. And then we just kept recording more and more as he taught more workshops after that and gathering more material. But that was enough to create the structure. And then we had a first pilot with people that I invited people from the 2018 January Vancouver Compassion Inquiry 2-day training to take this little pilot project in Compassion Inquiry. And that was the beta test of 8 modules. How does this work for you? And then after that, it was training the first group of facilitators. And then after that, now we're in January 2019, then we ran the first training. So 2018 was really training people and testing it. And then 2019 was the first program. And of course, we just keep adding more material and fine-tuning it as we go along.
I have a curiosity, Sataram. Over here where I'm from, there was an old television show, and it was called This Is Your Life. I don't know if you had that in Canada. So what would happen was a person, probably nearing the end of their career, they would be brought to a dinner. So it was a surprise. They didn't know. And they would walk into this room and it was a television studio, and the whole show would be dedicated to "This is your life." And they used to have a big red binder that they would present it to the person at the end. So you had your children and you achieved this and you've done this work. And as you're telling the story about dissecting and categorizing Gabor's work, I had this idea of you approaching Gabor at some point with this folder and saying, "This is your work." I wonder how he received that when you had dissected and categorized. And
the first time I did it, he said, "No, that's not it."
yeah.
So then I fine-tuned and did it again. And how about this? Oh yeah, that's it. So it was a process, me gingerly saying, "Are these the steps?" And he was changing too, right? Because Gabor is infinitely curious and infinitely interested in other approaches and integrates, as we know. I had to move with it too. And it's worked out just fine. So it was a collaboration for sure of me saying, "How about this? Do you approve of this?" And he would say, "Yes, that's great." And now, until finally we have a great working relationship of trust and respect for how it unfolds.
So he received it well on a second or third attempt then.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Satram, I'm conscious of our time as well, but I do want to ask, and I'm getting a sense of it listening to your own story, and I know a little of Gabor's story. I am still curious though around why are these programs landing in the world, and why is addiction healing so important? Why are they happening?
Uh-huh. We need more connection. We've lost, to some degree, we've lost the tribe. And even the nuclear family has split apart. I was looking at a cookbook the other day online, and the person writing the cookbook said, "I wrote this cookbook, and it's a cookbook for meals for 12 people because I was tired of eating alone." The encouragement is to cook meals for 12 people and invite 11 more people over for dinner so that nobody has to be alone eating. We're disconnected from community. A lot of people are. And we're disconnected from ourselves. And so what I see happening and what I am interested in creating is communities where people can heal together, share together, whether they're online or in person, eat together if you're in person. And we need these communities to heal in, grow together. So Compassion Inquiry very much is one of those communities. The Beyond Addiction program is another one of those communities. It's in relationship that we heal. So it's very difficult to heal on our own. So we need to create communities where people can be in relationship to one another, feel safe with one another, trust one another, and be authentic with one another. And that can help to heal addiction. And because that community is missing, because the family, if we go back to early childhood, why is the mother stressed? Why is the father stressed? Because they're not in community. Where are the aunts and the uncles and grandparents helping out with the child? Why does the mother have to go to work? Why are we in this society where so much of the value is placed on material wealth? There's a lot of things that have to change, but these are some of the, I think, causes of systemic addiction is the nuclear families rather than communities or tribes, or even a very like a one-person parent instead of a larger family. And then there's so much stress on those parents that the child rearing isn't as complete as it might be for the child.
The undertone that I hear in that Satram, which is really delightful, is moving the responsibility for addiction away from someone who is addicted.
Yeah. It is. The responsibility is the community.
Yeah.
It's not the responsibility of the addicted person. They have to want to change. It's really the collective responsibility. We got ourselves in this mess together. And the addicted person is just a symptom of, as Gabor calls it, the toxic culture. So how do we address the toxic culture and create a new paradigm, right? A new way of being, new possibilities, so that everyone is held. Everyone can be welcomed. Everyone can have a place. Everyone is accepted. That's what we have to create. And when we're working with people with addictions, that's what we want to create, is that kind of a space where they can heal, feel safe, and then grow in community. With healthy people too, with people who are, we know that people with addictions often are around other people with addictions, and they are a community unto yourselves. And one way that's wonderful, that there's a community. But on the other hand, when you're trying to change habits and move out of addiction, we need to surround ourselves with people who don't have addictions or not serious addictions in order to heal. And then you go back to the whole nervous system thing. We need a whole bunch of people in that ventral vagal who can support others who are not quite in that state yet.
Yeah, I just think that's really important, Sataram, for those living with addiction to hear. And it's a quote that is very central to the compassion and inquiry teaching, is it's not your fault.
Yeah. No. And so let me just see how this goes again. Yeah, what's wrong with you, right? So that's the first thing that we used to think about people with addictions. What's wrong with you? So we move from that to what happened to you. Let me understand you from a place of compassion and care, the compassion of understanding. Let me understand your trauma. What happened to you? That's why you're in this predicament right now. So there's no blame, no shame. It's just what happened to you. And then the next one is what happened to your ancestors. Because the tendency to addiction it could be from our childhood experience, but our childhood experience is also, the trauma also can be passed down through several generations. So we may be reflecting, if we have an addiction, more also from our ancestors, what they went through. So it's what happened to your ancestors. And then finally, the healing eventually is, you're not what happened to you. Once we heal and process all of that, metabolize all of that, go through all that pain, release all that pain, get to the other side, and then we recognize, oh, here's back to my true identity. My true identity is not what happened to me. My true identity is this ever-present essence in me that can never be damaged. That's where we want to take people. But that's a process. It's a long process of healing that can be done only through relationship, I believe, and in community.
Thank you, Sataram. But a full circle background to attachment to community.
Yeah.
I just want to add on a little figure there, Sataram, and then I'm going to ask you a final question. I've been doing some work myself. And when we talk about ancestral trauma, there's something in my mind, maybe it's from the movies or something. When we think of ancestors, we think of thousands of years ago. But in my own history, so the Irish famine, which isn't a word I like to use, and I'm not so sure it was a famine, but that was 1846. And even that seems like 1846 seems like thousands of years ago when we just think of the number. But my grandfather's grandfather was alive then. My grandfather's grandfather. So my grandfather would have known the person that was alive in 1846 through that era. So it's not that long ago. It's recent history. And it wouldn't be surprising at all that the emotional attunement or development of my grandfather's grandfather would be present in my life. It's not that long ago.
It's absolutely true, Kevin. Thanks for bringing that up. So that's how it's passed on through epigenetics. The genes are switched on or off based on the traumas that we experienced as young children, but also the traumas that come through our ancestors through the egg and the sperm. So it would have been 100% that famine.
Yeah. But before I thought the Irish famine, very distant, but it's not that distant at all.
No, yeah. So it's very important that we investigate, as you have, what did our ancestors go through, just to have more understanding of where some of these behaviors come from in us, because we may not know how come I'm like this. And it's maybe have nothing to do with this lifetime, but from something that happened through your ancestors that we're still carrying, responding to.
And when we think about recent wars and, in World War II, World War I, et cetera, they are not very far away at all. They're very immediate history. Thank you, Satharam. Satharam, before I ask you one final question, which might be a slightly playful question, but is there anything that we haven't spoken about today that you feel it's important to lean into or to speak about?
Well, maybe one thing is that I really like also Dr. Mark Lewis's books on addiction. And one of the things he says is that addiction is just one step on this journey of self-development. We needn't see it as a terrible thing, but rather as part of the journey that we overcome. And that many people, when they move beyond addiction, or even as they're addicted, really contribute great things. And sometimes because of the addiction, right? As I said with my mother too. So just to not treat it as a terrible thing, but rather a symptom of a society that's not quite in balance, and families that are stressed. And that we can create a different culture so that it can be healed. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do with compassionate inquiry.
Thank you, Satharam. When you spoke earlier about your own story, I was thinking of the name of this podcast, which is The Gifts of Trauma.
Yeah.
And of Gabor's second most recent video, which was The Wisdom of Trauma. And it's a really different view of looking at our behaviors right now and trying to find the wisdom in there and the gifts in there, and how we can use that to support and help and build a community and heal each other. That's a very different model from shaming, blaming, ostracizing, criminalizing.
Yeah, ultimately, we want to look at the addiction as a possible growth media for something different. It's just that we need to be nurtured to bring the best out of it, to transform that into something that's going to be positive.
Thank you. Final question, comment from yourself. You might have already said it, but if you could whisper a few words in the ear of humanity, what would they be?
It's okay. Everything's going to be all right. You're not alone. And there's help.
I feel that relaxing my nervous system as I sit here. It's okay, you're not alone, and there's help. Dharam Kaur, I am delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you on the Gifts of Trauma podcast from Compassionate Inquiry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Lovely to be with you.
If you've been listening to our podcast and are curious about the transformative power of compassionate inquiry, you are invited to join us on Saturday, February 22nd, for a 6-hour online experiential introduction to the compassionate inquiry approach and community. Whether you're a healthcare professional, therapist, coach, or simply someone seeking trauma-informed personal healing or professional growth, the CI Experience event invites you to witness live demonstrations, learn practical techniques, participate in reflective conversations, and connect with a supportive community of like-minded individuals, all in a single immersive day. This event will be recorded, and as a participant, you'll have lifetime access to the event recording and so much more. The CI Experience takes place on February 22nd. To learn more and register, just follow the link in the show notes. The Gifts of Trauma is a weekly podcast that features personal stories of trauma healing, transformation, and the gifts revealed on the path to authenticity. Listen on Apple, Spotify, all podcast platforms. Rate, review, and share it with your clients, colleagues, and family. Subscribe and you won't miss an episode. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personal therapy or a DIY formula for self-therapy.